Charles, happy Easter. Welcome to the show. I forgot to have our dissolve, but it's lovely to see you.
It's great to be here. Great to be back in the residential library.
Exactly. The residential library. You know, Charles, it is Easter, and we were going to do a big Easter-themed show, but I think a lot of people have seen over the past several days, I have been dropping some counter-lawfare bombs on some of the most evil people in all of Congress, and it's incredibly interesting, Charles. You know, somebody had contacted me just asking, this is the crowdsource the truth process at its finest. Somebody had contacted me just asking some questions about Andrew Weissmann. And I was thinking a lot about, you know, Tish James and this whole investigation that Sam Antar and Joel Gilbert have been doing. And I had used that ACRIS database, and I started looking into Andrew Weissmann, and we discovered that he had been involved in this real estate transaction with this individual whose name is Leonard Toberoff and is implicated in the Tower financial scandal, which you've spoken to about us in the past. Jeffrey Epstein, Hoffenberger, implicated in that. Hoffenberger said these guys lied. For some reason, nothing ever happened to Toberoff. He also brought in Epstein to that, what was it called, pendant or something? There was some other...
Penwalt.
Penwalt, right, there it is. Hoffenberger and Epstein. So he's not just some, you know, unrelated guy. He's involved in Ponzi schemes and criminal activity with Epstein. And remember, Weissmann, he was the FBI general counsel. He was the head of the organized crime division in the Eastern District of New York after Caproni left. This guy's supposed to be an expert in financial fraud, and he knows every organized crime mobster in New York. How could he not know Toberoff? But he enters into this transaction to purchase an apartment, 2 apartments actually, for $7.5 million from Toberoff. He gets a $1 million loan from First Republic, which seems like a low loan to me on a $7.5 million real estate deal, but that's what he does. And then the mortgage, he signs it just 5 days before the bank collapses. Now, separately, I've been told that there is testimony. I haven't been able to find this yet, but I've been told that there's testimony from March of 2023 where Weissmann reveals that he knows the bank is going to collapse. So that's quite interesting. But he gets a loan 5 days before the bank goes into FDIC receivership. I don't know that much about banking, Charles. I know you know much more than I do, but it seems weird to me that a bank that's failing would give out $1 million loan 5 days before it goes under. But then JP Morgan Chase takes over First Republic. The loan sails on through. And because of the way the bank, you know, takeover works, Weissmann had a jumbo arm from First Republic, and it was 4.95%, but could go up to as high as 10%. But when they took it over with JP Morgan, it locked in the deal at 4.95% for 10 years. And there were a lot of questions here. I mean, red flags. Obviously, we need to subpoena some of this stuff to really find out what's going on. But from the public records that I can see, there's no NYC transfer taxes recorded. Look at all these zeros, very weird. And it just has the look of a transaction that seems not legitimate, like they're trying to hide some kind of fraud-tainted assets. And this is the type of stuff that Weissmann should know about. So, you know, we just kept looking into it and made this little court sketch of Weissmann on trial with Epstein, which he should have been. And then, you know, the investigation went deeper the second day because I just couldn't get over the timing of the loan and all that. And we found out that when you look at the mortgage, he doesn't seem to have ever paid it back. They just transfer the loan over here and it kind of goes into oblivion. They assume the loan without renegotiating anything, and they didn't challenge the underwriting, didn't demand any changes, and they lock in this 4.95% for 10 years. Pretty wacky deal. But at the time, mortgage rates were 6.5% to 7%. And it seems like Weissmann knew, Charles. It seems like he did. I can't prove this yet, but hopefully we will soon be able to. And what happened then was I began to investigate some other people. And this is where it gets super interesting. Yeah.
Shouldn't we just focus on this for a second and have a reaction on that? Or
Sure.
do you want to keep? Yeah. So the first question I had for you, and I think we talked about this by phone, if it's 7.5 million of purchase price and 1 million of loan, did you come up with 6.5 million? And if so, where do you get that money?
I'm glad you asked that question, Charles. There's no record at all of the remaining 6.5 million being paid in any way, yet the property is deeded to Weissmann. I think they usually want the 6.5 million first, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's weird too. Thank you for asking about that. But so,
the second point I would make to you, our first show in detail was examining the business model for charity fraud. And that was an area that I assumed that charity fraud, if it occurred, was small. And I think now we're learning 8 years later, that charity fraud is not the exception, it's the rule. So here in this case, you mentioned Toberoff and you mentioned Tower Financial. Another element to think about is fraud in bankruptcy. So in bankruptcy, your debts go away. But if your assets are undervalued and transferred to a third party surreptitiously, that's a way that you're in a position before bankruptcy where in theory, your debts exceed the value of your assets. Bankruptcy eliminates those debts, or there's a negotiation as to how much they're marked down. If you're dishonest, which Hoffenberg obviously was, and Epstein obviously is and was, then what you do is you conspire to say that your assets are worth a lot less than they truly are, and you find a way for somebody close to you to get those assets. I bring this up because I think there's never been a true accounting of the Towers Financial bankrupt estate, nor has there ever been a true accounting of the Epstein estate. And bankruptcy judges have enormous power. They operate, they have little fiefdoms. So if you happen to have a few crooked ones, then those crooked ones can arrange to convey these assets to cronies, and they can get payback in various ways, either election cash, cash itself, side deals, etc. So what you hit on here, I think, is really interesting, and it's another underside of the American economy, of the Western economy, that really needs to be explored in great depth. So I just want to make sure I made those points before you went on.
I appreciate that, Charles, and also thank you for granting me the time to share this with everybody. It's kind of complicated, but it's very important. I wanted people to know about it, and I'm not exaggerating when I say, Charles, I think this might be certainly the biggest thing I've ever been involved in, and I will not be surprised if this becomes bigger than something like Watergate, because it is just so connected to everything. But let me carry on here, because Andrew Weissmann had a lot to do with Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, and this whole Letitia James-driven Juan Mershon, Alvin Bragg, hush money, Trump fake trial. And even though Weissmann wasn't in there and wasn't part of the prosecutors or the team, I've inserted him here with AI wearing his clown nose, sitting behind Trump. But, I'm saying that his involvement wasn't just limited to MSNBC commentary. There's a pattern that's emerging here, and there's a lawfare enterprise that is able to suborn secret illicit payments. We spoke to Norm Eisen on the street outside this trial about how they obviously convinced Michael Cohen to pay Stormy Daniels from his own money. Now, Charles, for a long time, I had made a mistaken assumption about how Stormy Daniels got the money, because I had heard Michael Cohen's testimony where he said that he didn't want to tell his wife about the payments to Stormy Daniels, and he didn't want to pay Trump. And then he also had all this testimony about marital property. And when he got the $130,000, I presume that he had used non-marital property, because you can't get a loan against marital property if you don't tell your wife she's got to co-sign. So the thing that's super interesting is our good buddies at First Republic Bank. Now, this was happening before 2023, obviously, but Michael Cohen got his $500,000 HELOC from First Republic Bank, and he got it while he was under criminal investigation. They didn't care that he was using the money to make a politically charged payoff to a hooker. I mean, don't the banks usually want to know, what are you going to do with this $500,000, Michael Cohen? But instead,
absolutely,
yeah, he just got in line. You know, this is First National. You get rich clients and guys who have pickup trucks with money loaded in the back. So he gets that. But don't worry, Charles, because Janet Yellen told us, even though the collapse of First Republic Bank and the FDIC seizure and whatever it is, the covering of the deposits, that cost $15.6 billion. But don't worry, Charles, taxpayer funds weren't used. The money magically, just did whatever. So,
well, Janet Yellen is a moron. She's always born a moron, has always been a moron. She should never have been Federal Reserve Chair or Secretary of the Treasury. She was a disaster in her role as Secretary of the Treasury. Well, before we get into the more details, I'd like to tease out the idea that, or I think it's fact, that the true villains in the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis have never been identified or punished. And you have to ask yourself, why might that be? What could lead all the regulators, Congress, the Senate, the mainstream media to ignore what should be an epic journey to figure out and identify all the people who contributed to the crash, all the people who benefited from the crash, and all the people who now luxuriate in the capital and profits that they may have gotten out of the crash. And I think the answer to the question is, those people include members of Congress in both parties, members of the Senate in both parties, people in the bureaucracy, throughout the bureaucracy, especially including the FDIC and the financial regulators, the SEC, people in the media, owners of the big media empires who may need loans that they shouldn't get exactly the way they got them, reporters who find themselves in a position where they've got kids going to private school and they're not making that much money and they need to have a place for them. Maybe they get mortgages they shouldn't get. So the business model for bankruptcy fraud and for paying off regulators seems to be this trick of giving people loans to buy assets that they can't afford to own, and then arranging for those loans to disappear and not reporting the gains that you're supposed to report on your income tax returns. I mean, when Weissmann gets an off-market rate mortgage, if you say mortgage rates are 7% and it's $1 million loan, and he's getting 4.95 locked in for 10 years, that's a gift. That's income.
Of course. No one's getting that. And from a failing bank 5 days before it goes out.
Yeah, and you look at that fat, excuse my language, members of the audience who might be offended by bad language, but that fat bitch, the state attorney general, Tish James, going after Trump. Look, I always talk about contrast. Look at the contrast between, here's somebody who's lied for decades, getting loans across state lines. That's federal bank fraud. Lied for decades about that. Has no way to explain the down payments on all these homes. It doesn't come from money. I doubt she's a shrewd investor. So where did she get the equity for all these properties?
Yeah.
Going after Donald Trump, a man who has had his ups and downs, and God bless him for having ups and downs. Somebody who's never failed is never going to be a superstar.
Yeah.
Right. You have to experience failure and learn from it and get stronger for it. So here's Donald Trump. She concocts this bullshit case in league, I would guess, with Jack Smith and others in Washington, D.C. in the Biden administration, perhaps with Merrick Garland himself. This bullshit case that Donald Trump should pay. What's the penalty? Is it
$450 million?
Yeah, $450 million, because he obtained a loan on false pretenses, in her view, but leaving out that he paid off the loan in full on a timely basis. I mean, it's a ridiculous. If I I have no legal training, no formal legal training, but if I were the Attorney General of New York State and somebody came into my office and said, this is the case we want to bring against the likely Republican nominee for president, I'd fire that person's ass. I'd transfer them to, I don't know, some place that's really unpleasant in the winter in New York State and say, you're in charge of cleaning the toilets after a bunch of people go and after AOC hosts a taco lunch. I mean, it's ridiculous, this contrast. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous.
Totally. So, and it's we're not even part of the way there, Charles. But of course, Tish James is involved in this, and that's what started me thinking about it. I was like, wait a minute, this was really the nexus right here. Because remember, I was on top of this Stormy Daniels nonsense trial, and really knew that Norm and I was saying at the trial, Norm Eisen, Andrew Weissmann, Ben Wittes, that they had put the whole thing together, and Norm ran away when I said that. So there's another. Let me go back. I want to show you the next one. So after we did all that, I then discovered, we got to go up. Right. Get this. Okay. Adam Schiff. Now this happened because a lot of people started reacting to what I was putting out. And they're like, oh, look at this article about Adam Schiff having a problem with mortgages. And so I read that article, and it was just sort of, saying it's alleged, and, maybe, etc. And so I started doing what I had been doing to some of these other things and going into Adam Schiff's properties. It's one of these things where it's sometimes hard to break in at first, but then when I find like what his address is and what I need to be able to find this stuff, I'm able to delve into such an amazing array of information, Charles. It's kind of blowing my mind. So in this case, Adam Schiff bought a house in 2003. He signed a $610,000 mortgage on a home in Maryland. And he swore on the signing, under penalty, that this is going to be his primary residence. But he also, a few days before that, bought a house in Burbank, California, and he was living there because, he's the rep from California. Right. Okay. So he signed the legal documents promising to move into the Maryland house within 60 days of execution, but he never did. And it's within 5-6 days again. I don't know what that deal is, but these guys love the 5-day window. And he's got the house in Potomac and the house in Burbank. And he's got like as you said, he has to live in California. So the tax records confirm this. He never claimed the Maryland home on any of the filings as his primary residence. But he's signing mortgages and refinancing it many, many times on the different rate that you get for it being your primary residence. Well,
I'm not a lawyer, but Adam Schiff currently is a lawyer. I think he should be disbarred. He holds himself out as a super genius who's going to set up a shadow government to fight Trump and all this kind of stuff. But, if you take him before a law and order judge on this, Adam Schiff cannot claim that he was he wasn't, or he must claim that he was a resident of California, right? He can't. There's no basis for him to keep his political career and say, "Well, I was actually a resident of Maryland when I signed that," right? So he knew that to be a congressman and a senior political official and someone teeing up to be a senator of California, that he had to be a resident of California. Correct. And then he sent this loan application in. If he's a resident of California, I would argue he sent the loan application in across state lines.
Correct. Exactly. This is a RICO in Congress. That's why this is such a big deal. He's signing this loan agreement that says the borrower shall occupy, establish, and use the property as the borrower's principal residence within 60 days of the execution. And he's doing multiple refinances where he keeps signing that. So he can't say it was like one mistake. He's doing this for years and years. So in 2009 and 10, he refinanced this Maryland property again, and he swore again that it was his primary residence. It wasn't until 2020 that he changed it when he filed this second home rider in 2020.
Now, when did he get elected to the Senate?
23. But I think it was because Joe Biden got elected, he was doing something. I'm not sure why. Maybe he was getting ready. I don't know why he did that, but it's interesting that he did, that he changed it. So Schiff didn't use First Republic, but he's playing the same game. He's got contradictory residence declarations. He's got multiple refinancings all over the place, hidden perks, possible state tax fraud, false statements under federal mortgage laws.
Well, I know
he's trying to kill Ed Martin's confirmation. Is it a coincidence, or is Pencil Neck worried that an actual prosecutor is going to wring that pencil neck?
Yeah, sharpen it. I think that with a guillotine. But anyway, one point to make here, some of our viewers may not have the experience of owning a second home with a mortgage. But there's a great significance to saying that your home is your primary residence, because a lot of the mortgage programs that are out there only allow you to buy a home under these programs if it's going to be your primary residence. Why is that the case? Because primary residences are occupied more frequently, maintained more carefully, and studies have shown over time, I believe, that it's riskier to make a loan for a second residence, because you're there a weekend home. By definition, you're only there 100 days a year, maybe if you go every weekend, 104, and it's likely that the maintenance will be not as attentive as it might be for a primary residence. So by convention and tradition, and because of experience, interest rates on second homes are higher than on first homes. So, people talk about the benefit that Donald Trump got because of his, the loan that he shouldn't have gotten in the Tish James trial. And I'm ashamed to admit that a former Dillon Reed alumnus was the expert witness on that. The guy's a moron. But the point here is that Schiff, you mentioned years. If he's been saying from 2006 or whatever it was to 2009, that's 11 years of saying that this was his primary residence. And typically you have to, with these mortgages, you have to sign documents every year saying nothing's changed or whatever. This is purposeful deceit.
Yes. And changing it in 2020, it shows that he knows he's guilty, and he's trying to, I think what's happening is he says, okay, Joe Biden won. Now I'm going to run for Senate, because if Trump won, I'm never going to win. But Joe Biden's in there. Let me start cleaning up my dirty record. So in 2023, we'll be ready to run. And so, Charles, we're almost out of time. We have 2 more minutes. And what we'll do is, I'm sorry to be taking up so much time, but I think you're seeing what I'm talking about. It's important. I've got another piece that I just dropped 2 hours ago, but we're not going to have time to go into this right now. We can talk about it more on the First Amendment Forum. People will be able to join us on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. The video will also be posted for subscribers who follow me on X and subscribe at JG_CSTT. But just to give you a brief overview, Charles, this one, basically, Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin, they need criminal defense attorneys, because this is not stuff that I'm synthesizing. This is not things that I'm guessing at. These are documents that they have filed, that the documents themselves contain contradictory and false statements that are self-evident within the document. So I think, Charles, they're in a large amount of trouble. How do you like this investigation so far?
I think it's good for you, and it's good for what you've done here. I mean, here you're conducting journalism at a very high level, using tools that you're exploring, but most have not fully explored. So this is, I think, a landmark show.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate you saying that. It really means a lot to me. And I do agree. I mean, this is bigger than me. I'm not trying to boast. I think this will be picked up, because these are the people that the president has said we're going after. And people can see this in the public domain, so I don't mind saying it. Recently, the interim U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C. started following me on X. So I think it's safe to assume he has seen this research. I don't know if he'll act on it. If he does, I don't know if a judge will convict any of these people, but I'm doing what I can do. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Charles, thank you for listening to all that and for giving me that feedback and input. I'm like almost overwhelmed with this information, but we'll be right back, everybody. Stay with us.